What's good everyone? Today we are going to compare the Sony A7IV to the Lumix S5, and I think I'm one of the only people to actually use both cameras for an extended period of time, so this will give you a pretty fair comparison. And to cut to the chase a little bit, I've actually used the S5 and I've jumped over to Sony. Long story short, my S5 died on me. We'll get to that later in the video. Alright, so just to preface everything, I'm a bit of a landscape / adventure photographer, and I do a lot of videography as well, mainly content creation, so I'm not filming like big budget commercials for different huge companies with external monitor. That being said, I do a lot of paid gigs, and I'm not like just an amateur just trying to take photos for fun. So that's why we're landing right in the middle for perfect, I guess, mid-tier full-frame cameras, which is the A7IV and the Lumix S5. Okay, so now diving into the photo and video comparison, the biggest glaring difference in regards to the photos is that there's a 33 megapixel sensor, and the increase in megapixels is actually pretty beneficial because the Sony has an APS-C crop mode, and once you crop in you get like a 17 megapixel image, which is actually very usable and not that far from 24. So it just gives you that extra reach. I've been shooting on a wide angle lens, so that really helps, and it's pretty convenient if you don't have other lenses and you don't want to waste money. Whereas obviously the Lumix doesn't have that, so for pure resolution, obviously it's better, you can crop more. For photo and video dynamic range, if you look at the Cine D test, long story short, the A7IV has 2 more stops of dynamic range when shooting log versus the Lumix log. It's about 14 versus 12. I'm sure that slightly reflects in the dynamic range of photos as well, but honestly both cameras, I feel like if you underexpose them, bring the shadows back up, they look pretty damn good. In regards to video, the cameras are almost identical in my opinion. They both have 4K 60 cropped. The only slight difference is that the Lumix has 180 FPS at 1080p, while we're capped at 120 FPS on the Sony A7IV. The one other glaring difference would be the IBIS performance. With the Lumix S5, the IBIS is a lot better than the A7IV. The A7IV does have active stabilization, which does save a little bit, but does get a bit jerky, as you can see in these different walkthrough tests that I did. That being said, I feel like even with active stabilization and pairing things with warp stabilizer, both of them need warp stabilizer anyway, so it doesn't make that much of a difference. However, what really bothers me more about the IBIS is that because the IBIS sucks so much on the A7IV, you really can't lower the shutter speed when you're taking photos to a, I guess, significant level. So for example, on the Lumix camera, with like a 20mm lens, you can lower it to 1/10 of a second easily. Even like if you get to 1 second exposures, it could probably handle it about like a 40% hit rate. Whereas on the A7IV, I'm reaching like, I don't know, 1/10 of a second, and it's already starting to show signs of shakiness because the IBIS cannot hold the camera still. And you might not think it's a big difference, but it really comes out to like maybe 2 stops of light given the difference of IBIS performance. So that's something you should really keep in mind. For the ISO performance, I feel like both cameras do a very good job, and there's not that much of a disparity there again. Overall, in photos you get better resolution to play with and different types of cropping you can use. And for the Lumix S5, you get like 2 stops of better brightness because the IBIS is so good, and just in general slightly better IBIS. So you do have to weigh up what you prioritize. If you're a hardcore landscape photographer that has a tripod everywhere, then you're good regardless, but that is something you should definitely consider, especially if you are run and gun. Alright, now let's talk about autofocus performance. So there's no surprises here, the Lumix S5 is a bit suspect in regards to autofocus, and once you jump from the Lumix S5 to A7IV, the autofocus on your face is dreamlike. You can just like move back and forth and it focuses you perfectly. This doesn't really happen at all on the Lumix S5. It loses a lot of focus. There's many clips of me vlogging and it just loses me completely, which is not ideal. Let's also quickly talk about ergonomics. In general, the Panasonic Lumix S5 is 10 times of a better camera to use. There's just so many little things that come in it together. For example, why does Sony have a record button? Like, why don't you just start and stop every clip, or like take a photo with a shutter button, which is what the Lumix has. The menus are so much better. There's many different ways to customize. You can put a histogram wherever you want on the screen, whereas I haven't figured out how to do that, and I've been actually caught myself Googling many different things for the Sony. That might be because I've used Panasonic for so long, but that definitely goes to Panasonic, but no one's buying cameras for ergonomics anyway. Alright, so now in regards to price, the A7IV is $4,000 just for the body in Australia. That is a shit ton. Whereas the Lumix S5 with the 20-60 lens, which keep in mind, it's a very good lens, very sharp, be happy to print that anywhere, that's $3,000. So there's quite a big disparity. So clearly the Lumix is a much cheaper option for almost neck and neck performance. That being said, the L-mount system is pretty expensive, but if you buy Lumix lenses, you might pay maybe $100, $200, maybe $300 more than what you would versus a Tamron, for example. So it's not that big of a difference, but if you're someone who's gonna buy like 5 prime lenses, you're probably better off going Sony and it might actually come out cheaper. So let's just lead to the last part of this video. Which one should you actually buy? And let me just say, I'm not including any Nikon cameras or Canon cameras because one, Canon's just way too expensive and overpriced. And number two, Nikon is great, however, the videos from the like Z6II, whatever it's called, the videos aren't that great. It can't record 12-bit internally versus both these cameras can, and that's why they're not included. But the verdict is, I feel like the Lumix S5 is definitely the most cost-effective option if you're someone who isn't going to buy too many lenses and can just live with an amazing camera and maybe like a 24-70 and maybe a prime lens. If you have money to blow, you should definitely get the A7IV. Mainly the difference in price of the Lumix S5 and the A7IV is just you're paying like $1,000 to get autofocus. And look, some might think it's worth it, but you can definitely get by and just save that money if you're doing something with a lot of people, a lot of portrait photography. Keep in mind, in photography mode, the Lumix S5 does perfectly fine. If that's who you are, then maybe invest in the A7IV, but unless you want this continual autofocus, the A7IV is for you. Regardless of the price, it is not a cheap camera. So that's my take. I would probably go with the S5. I'm not feeling like this is a game changer. Like, sure, there's less out of focus bits in my vlogs, but does it really matter that much? No. You've got to be some type of like rich YouTuber to justify that price, but to me, I think the Lumix S5 is still better. But don't get me wrong, this is an amazing camera. That brings me to my last point. Why is Panasonic dead to me? So, long story short, I was in Zion National Park. I never dropped my camera. I didn't do anything to it. I was literally holding it while I was shooting. Next thing you know, I put the battery in and it says this battery cannot be used. And I was just like, what the hell? If I'm spending $3,000 to buy a camera and it stops working after 11 months, that is ridiculous. I was just so scarred with that I could not use the Lumix S5 anymore. So that's why the S5 is ditched, and that is why I jumped on Sony. I do not have any regrets, except it really annoys me how the IBIS is so bad. But mostly I just cannot trust S5 anymore. I'm personally wounded. That being said, this is probably a freak accident. Who knows how that happened. I still encourage everyone to go buy it, but I guess not just for me. And yeah, so that wraps up the video. Let me know if you want maybe a full A7IV review, or if you have any questions, I'll get to everything below. But other than that, have a good one.